Kia ora, good morning everyone, Richard Wong here. Welcome back to the channel. Today we will have a look at another lens for the Nikon Z cameras. It's the YN lens 85mm f1.8Z. If you have never heard of YN lens, it's because it's just another name for Yongnuo, which my usual viewers should be familiar with, as I've reviewed quite a few of their autofocus lenses recently for micro four thirds cameras. But today this one is for Nikon Z, and it is also a autofocus lens as well. So depends on when I publish this video, it would be either the second or the third company that released autofocus lens for Nikon Z cameras. And this is also the second third-party 85mm 1.8 lens after Viltrox. So in this video, let's have a look at this new YN 85mm f1.8 lens, and we will do some comparison with the Viltrox 85 1.8 lens as well, as the price of this YN lens should be a bit cheaper than the Viltrox lens. So let's see which one is the better budget autofocus 85 1.8 lens for Nikon Z shooters. Like I mentioned just before, I have reviewed a few lenses from Yongnuo recently. They all have a pretty plastic constructions, so I was also expecting a pretty plasticky lens this time as well. But I was a bit surprised when I took this lens out of the box, as this lens is mostly made of metal. The lens feels pretty solid and also higher quality than the previous lenses from the company. I was also quite surprised that the logo YN lens and also the 85 number here are both engraved onto the lens instead of just printed. That definitely make the lens feel a bit more premium. However, I do have a small complaint about the custom button on the side of the lens here, and also the AF/MF switch next to it. When you press the button or when you flick the switch, the tactile feeling reminds me that this is a budget lens. Well, there's nothing wrong, I mean they both work as expected, but it just doesn't give you any satisfying feeling. But other than that, the overall build quality of this YN 85 f1.8 lens is definitely pretty good, especially if you consider the price. The button and the focus ring can both be customized on the camera body, just like a native Z lens. This YN 85 1.8 is quite a compact 85mm f1.8 lens as well. I've been shooting with the Viltrox 85 1.8 Z lens for quite a while, so kind of get used to the size of the Viltrox lens. So when I first saw this YN lens, I immediately noticed the difference in size. For example, the front filter is only 58mm, which is quite a bit smaller than the Viltrox lens, which is 72mm. The weight of this lens is only just over 400 grams, which is significantly lighter than the Viltrox lens, which is around 540 grams. I don't have the Nikon Z 85 1.8S lens with me to compare, but by looking at the specs, this YN lens is also quite a bit smaller and lighter than the Nikon lens. So if you want to keep your camera bag as small and lightweight as possible, this YN lens is the smallest and the lightest autofocus 85mm 1.8 lens for your Nikon Z camera. Another thing I want to mention is there is a rubber seal on the metal lens mount, as well as a rubber cover for the USB port to allow users to shoot under a bit of bad weather. This is something most Chinese lenses don't offer for some reason, so I'm really happy to see this on this YN lens, and hopefully more and more Chinese manufacturers will start to do that as well. The USB port uses a Type-C connector, which I like, and that allow you to do firmware update. However, one thing I don't like about the USB port is the rubber cover is on the outside of the lens, so there is a chance that the cover may fall off from the lens by accident. I did talk to Yongnuo about that, and hopefully they will find a better solution while still can keep the lens weatherproof for their future products. But anyway, make sure you push the rubber cover completely in when you receive the lens or after you do a firmware update, so you won't lose the cover accidentally. The lens also comes with a reversible plastic lens hood, and it fits onto the lens quite easily and securely. So overall, for a budget lens, I think Yongnuo did a pretty good job in terms of build quality and features. I do not have any specs about the autofocus motor on this YN 85mm f1.8 lens, but what I can tell you is the autofocus performance, and it is good, very good. When taking photos in AFS mode, autofocus is fast and also very quiet. Not exactly silent, but you probably won't hear any autofocus noise unless you are in a completely silent room. And while I do sometimes see the autofocus would jump a bit before it snap and lock on the target, this happens very quickly, and to be honest, I'm not too sure if it's the camera or the lens that make it happen. Face detection works as expected, so yeah, overall the lens behaves pretty much identical to a native Nikon Z lens. I will talk about the video autofocus performance in the video section later on in this video. The minimum focus distance of this YN 85mm lens is 0.8 meter or 2.83 feet, which is about the same as the Viltrox lens. And they will give you the maximum magnification ratio of 0.13 times, which is alright. When I test the minimum focus distance, I found this YN 85mm lens, the minimum focus distance is slightly further away than the Viltrox, but the difference is only like a centimeter or two, so it doesn't really matter. And here are two side-by-side photos, both shot at each lens minimum focus distance, and you can see they look very similar. Both of these photos were shot at f1.8, so the depth of field is very shallow. Both lenses show a bit of chromatic aberration, but I think the YN lens has slightly less chromatic aberration than the Viltrox lens. Now let's have a look at the image sharpness and start with the center sharpness. At f1.8, the center of the YN lens is good, but not super sharp, and there is a small amount of chromatic aberration. Once I stop down to f2.8, then it becomes very sharp and I don't see any chromatic aberration anymore. Continue stop down the lens further, the sharpness becomes very similar until you reach f11, then the center becomes slightly softer because of diffraction. Comparing with the Viltrox lens, the Viltrox is slightly sharper at f1.8, but it also has a small amount of chromatic aberration. From f2.8 onwards, both lenses has very similar center sharpness. I can't really tell the difference. If we look at the corner now, at the maximum aperture, the YN lens corner sharpness is quite good, very usable for sure. However, one interesting thing is, stop down the lens doesn't really make much difference or improvement to the corner sharpness. Even when stop down to f4, the corner sharpness is still almost the same as f1.8, and stop down further will only improve the corner sharpness slightly until diffraction kicks in at around f11. Compare the corner sharpness with the Viltrox. They are both very similar. Even when comparing at 200% zoom, I don't see any significant difference between the photo from these two lenses. Now let's have a look at the bokeh. One of the most important things for a 85mm f1.8 lens, more than the sharpness if you ask me. So let's have a look at some photos that I shot at f1.8 with the YN 85mm 1.8 lens. The transition from the edge of the bokeh balls to background is smooth, doesn't look nervous at all. If you focus on some close distance subjects, you could see some cat's eye bokeh near the corner, like this photo, when you are shooting at the maximum aperture. Overall, the bokeh looks quite nice at f1.8. When you stop down the lens, because the lens only has 7 aperture breaks, so if the subject that you focus on is at close distance, you may see the bokeh balls in the background turn into polygon shape. This doesn't happen all the time, as if you look at this set of sample photos, the bokeh balls remain round even when I stop down the lens to f4 or f5.6. Comparing the YN lens with the Viltrox, the bokeh from these two lenses are quite similar, especially at f1.8. I do think the bokeh balls from the Viltrox has a little bit more noticeable highlight at the edge of the bokeh balls, while the YN lens has a slightly smoother transition from the bokeh balls to the background, but the difference is really quite small. When shooting at wide open, the YN 85mm lens has some noticeable vignetting. You can see the light fall off near the corner very easily. Stop down to f2.8, vignetting becomes a lot better, but even when stopped down to f8, there's still some minor vignetting visible near the corner. If you compare it with the Viltrox lens, the Viltrox has slightly less vignetting at f1.8. But with the Viltrox lens, once you stop down to f2.8, then vignetting become not really noticeable at all. So the Viltrox is much better than the YN lens in this area. Maybe that's the reason why the Viltrox is quite a bit larger with a larger front element than the YN lens. In terms of chromatic aberration, it is reasonably well controlled by this YN lens. While I do see a bit of color fringing in some of my high contrast photos, it is usually quite minor and you have to zoom in the photo to see that. The Viltrox lens also has a small amount of chromatic aberration, and the amount is very similar to the YN lens. So in this area, the two lenses both have very similar performance and are both quite acceptable in my opinion. Let's have a look at the distortion. The YN lens has a small amount of pincushion distortion. It is not serious at all and can be corrected by applying a -5 distortion correction in Lightroom. The amount and pattern of the distortion is very similar to the Viltrox. There is a small amount of pincushion distortion, and if you compare these two brick wall photos that was shot at the same place, the field of view is almost identical as well. As a budget lens, lens flare control is pretty decent. I only see a small amount of lens flare even when shooting into the sun or a bright light source at night. Contrast also remains pretty good even when there is a strong light source in front of the camera or just outside the frame. I don't have any real issue with lens flare at all with this YN 85mm f1.8 lens. When I compare it with the Viltrox lens, the Viltrox lens is also pretty good in this area. Yes, there can also be a bit of lens flare sometimes, but it never become a real problem for me. So I think both companies did a pretty decent job in controlling the lens flare. If you love shooting landscape photos and love to have some beautiful sunstars in your photos, you need to stop down the YN lens to around f11 to get some long, sharp sunstars. At f16, you can get some pretty nice 14-point sunstars that look quite beautiful to me. The Viltrox 85mm lens has 9 aperture break, so the sunstars are 18 points. I personally always prefer simpler sunstars, so I like the sunstars from the YN lens a bit more. But yeah, this is quite a personal thing, so let me know if you disagree with me. Now let's have a look at the Coma performance when shooting some night photo at the maximum aperture. Let's look at this sample photo that was shot at f1.8. The Coma control is pretty good. There is a small amount of Coma, but it is not serious at all. The Viltrox at f1.8 has a little bit more Coma than the YN lens. When you stop down the YN lens to f2.8, then Coma is not really noticeable in this photo. So what about if you want to use this lens to shoot some video? I got some good news and some not so good news to share with you. The good news is continuous autofocus works very well with this YN lens. Face tracking works well and it can track and follow the subject very smoothly. The autofocus motor is also pretty quiet when working in continuous autofocus mode. Focus breathing though, the YN lens has quite a bit of focus breathing. It is very noticeable if you look at this example when I change the focus from 2 meter to about 20 meter. Definitely more than what you would want to see if you are a videographer. However, when I compare it with the Viltrox lens, the Viltrox also has some pretty noticeable breathing and the amount is very similar to the YN lens. While a lot of us are waiting for the more established third-party lens manufacturers to release their autofocus lenses for Nikon Z, it is the newer Chinese optics companies that are offering their autofocus Z lenses first. I was quite impressed by the Viltrox lens when I reviewed it about a year ago, and this time I'm also very happy with this YN 85mm f1.8 lens. Optically, the performance is pretty decent for a budget lens and very similar to the Viltrox. There are some areas the Viltrox does a little bit better, and then there are a few other areas the YN lens is a little bit better. But what I like the most is the compact size and weight of this lens. It is smaller than the Viltrox 85 1.8 lens and considerably lighter as well. The customizable button on the lens may be useful for some users, but I think most of us love the fact that it is a weatherproof lens, something most Chinese lenses don't offer, including the Viltrox. The overall build quality of this lens is definitely a step up compared to the previous lenses from Yongnuo. It is solid and has a bit of premium feeling that their previous lenses definitely don't have. Autofocus also works very well. It is smooth, relatively quiet, and quick too. So what are the downsides of this lens? Not that much really. I wish the center sharpness is a little bit better at f1.8. The feeling of the AF/MF switch and this button here could be a bit better. Vignetting could also be a bit better, especially when you stop down the lens. But none of these are serious issues, and it is very acceptable for our lens at this price point. I do think they need to find a better way to cover the USB port, as I'm worried some users may end up losing the rubber cover after a while. Or maybe I'm just overthinking. I guess we just have to wait and see. So are you guys excited to see more third-party manufacturers releasing lenses for Nikon Z? And what lens would you like to see from companies like Yongnuo? I'm sure Yongnuo will be reading the comments on this video, so drop a message here if there is a particular lens that you like them to create. For me, I would like to see a 135 f1.8 or f2 lens. I really miss this focal length since I sold my Nikon 135 DC f2 lens many years ago.